By the time you hear this podcast, I'm sure the vicious videotape of the beating death of a black man in Memphis, Tennessee by 5 black police officers will have been released by the city of Memphis. And that's going to be my first topic this evening, is this horrific beating. A beating that police officers there described as absolutely appalling. A police official described it that way. But before I get into that, I have some confessions to make. There's an awful lot about the way this case has been handled so far that has confused me and caused me to question what I've seen on television and bring it to this podcast. I can begin with this. When I first started hearing reports that a man in Memphis had been beaten to death by 5 police officers, I immediately thought of the Rodney King case in California and all sorts of other cases where a black man was beaten to death or beaten severely by white police officers or executed in the street. The cases I'm referring to. So I filed it in the back of my mind under the heading of, another one. Now what do we do? What do we do? And it took a while for the reality of it to sink in, that this was not a black man beaten to death by 5 white police officers. To the contrary, it was a black man beaten to death by 5 black police officers. After that was firmly established, in the way I perceived the whole case, then I started noticing on television, New York Times, just about every publication that I come in contact with, prominent displays, photographs of these 5 officers. And I had to check real quick, okay, Mike, is this because they're black officers and it was a black victim? Is the press trying to make a statement here along the lines of, look, it's not just white cops who beat black men to death? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I have to deal with the mindset that was handed to me by this society over the course of my life. And that includes attitudes about race that I'm still trying to get rid of. I don't mean overt racism. I'm beyond that. I truly believe. But these perceptions that I still carry with me. And it's a struggle. It's a constant struggle. And I doubt if I will finally resolve it before I die. I just don't think I will. My hope and faith lies in my children and grandchildren who seem to have, for the most part, escaped this racist bullshit that is so prevalent in this country. I don't know. Only they know. My kids and grandkids, only they know if they fully escaped it. But this morning, when I turned on MSNBC to watch the briefing by Memphis officials, at which point the videotape was to be released to the public, I got what felt like a shock. And maybe it's because I don't understand. I know I don't understand completely, or even a little bit maybe, how thoughts and realities and incidents that have to be dealt with are organized by the minds of people in positions of power who happen to be black. And my next question was, well, come on, Malloy, is it any different from white? How white people organize? And the quick answer is yes. The bigger answer is hell yes. I think about the videotape that is to be released in the short period of time after this atrocity occurred. And then I think about the videotape down here in South Georgia that was not released for over a year until the mother of the victim that was murdered down there demanded that the video be released. And as a result of that, 3 white men were convicted of beating the black man to death, shooting him to death. I'm sorry. So I get confused and I start stumbling around in my own racial attitudes. No, I'm not going to call it racism, but racial attitudes. But I have to admit that the speed by which this videotape is being released that shows this atrocity, and I don't know that I want to see it. Perhaps you have already. But the speed with which it was released by black officials, I think underscored for me something I've believed in for a very long time. And this may be part of my racial attitude, but I do believe that in this country, black folk try to find justice far more quickly than white folk do. And the reason for that is probably obvious, and that is black folk have had 400 years, 350 years to deal with injustice as far as the legal system is concerned and racial attitudes are concerned and cultural attitudes. So it stands to reason that black people in positions of authority, and not so much in authority, just black folk in general, would be more interested. Am I right here? Am I? More interested in seeing justice done than white people. Now, white people. Okay. Let me be clear. I'm sure you, if you're white, I'm sure you want to see justice in any situation. Yes, of course. And so do I. Yes, of course. But I think you understand what I'm saying. The overarching attitudes in this country among whites and blacks where it concerns justice can be entirely different given the same set of circumstances. What constitutes justice has decidedly different definitions. Which brings me to, I say all that to establish my confusion. That's all. My confusion about what to think about what I saw this morning in this press briefing by the Memphis authorities. All of whom, except one man, I think there were about 10, 12 people in front of the cameras, all of whom were black except one white person. But this police briefing began with a prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. That immediately was off-putting to me. No, seriously. I'm sure the people standing there with all their heads bowed and all their eyes closed, I watched. I'm sure they were believers in their Jesus Christ and his omnipotent power and his forgiveness and yada, 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 all the stuff in the Christian religion. But this was a briefing by the state, you might say. In this case, the city of Memphis. But the power of the state was standing there. And to open their briefing and to ask for blessings from Jesus Christ. I have to tell you, I found it off-putting, offensive, and it pissed me off. They didn't open with a prayer to Muhammad or to the Hebrew God, which is also the God of the Christians and the Muslims. No. It was directly to Jesus Christ, which completely focuses what the prayer giver was saying and eliminates everybody except those who believe in this mythological person, Jesus. I found it very offensive. And then the second thing that was very offensive to me was the repeated rounds of applause for various spokespersons who addressed that press briefing as if it were an awards ceremony. I mean, seriously. And it wasn't just after each introduction. Sometimes it was after each, granted, impassioned speech. Applause. Applause? Pleadings to Jesus Christ? This was to be, and I've seen so many of these, I'm sure you have too. This was to be a briefing for the press as this investigation into the murder of this man by 5 Memphis police officers proceeds. And part of that investigation included this horrific, so I've been told, vile, awful, appalling videotape of beating this man to death. Applause? Okay. I just had to get that out. I really am struggling with what it means to me. Why is this causing me what is mild shock? I mean, it is. First of all, the invocation of the name of the Christian Messiah. What's that about? Okay, they were all Christians up there. I don't give a shit. They were representatives of the state. In this case, Memphis, Tennessee, administration, police department, civil authorities. And the separation of church and state is particularly, singularly important in a moment like that. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.